Some of you can come around to this side of the still if you want to see the board more clearly. So you might be wondering why the stills are made from copper. It's because copper is a really good conductor of heat, and it's also good to remove any impurities from the liquid inside. As I mentioned, in Ireland we typically triple distill in these copper pots. It's a type of distillation quintessentially associated with Irish whiskey and still done in the same way today. Distillation simply is the separation of different liquids based on their different boiling points. So as we know, water has a boiling point of 100 degrees Celsius, but alcohol's boiling point is lower, it's 78.5 degrees Celsius. So when the beer or the wash that we made in the brew house was brought in here, it was fed into the first still, and the furnace we saw beneath was used to heat it up. Now, because alcohol has a lower boiling point than water, when the beer in the pot is heated up, the first vapours to boil off the beer are mainly alcohol vapours. So they boil up and meet a condenser and are cooled back down to a liquid form. We've left some water and residue behind in the still, which is discharged off. Having distilled and condensed the alcohol vapours now, we now have a liquid called low wines after the first distillation. And this has increased from the original 10 to 12% ABV of the beer, right up to 25 to 40%, dependent on the directive given by the head distiller. And now we're going to repeat the process again a second time. So the low wines are sent into the second still, it's heated up, alcohol vapours boil through, and after the condenser we have feints, and this is now at 72% ABV. So we're purifying out the alcohol. But we triple distill, so it's done again a third time. And after the third distillation, we have our new make pot still spirit at 84% alcohol by volume. That pot still spirit matures into a whiskey which is very spicy and intensely flavoured. And we often use just pot still whiskey to make many of our single pot still whiskey brands. Whiskies like the Redbreast 12-year-old, the Green Spot, the Yellow Spot, those are all single pot stills. The single meaning that all of the whiskey is made in one single distillery here in Midleton. I mentioned a difference between us and the Scottish earlier concerning the drying of the malt. Another difference is that in Scotland they generally double distill in these copper pots. And in the United States they use a different method of distillation to make American whiskies and bourbons. And over there they use continuous distillation or column stills. And that's shown to you on the second board down here. We show you this because we also use this method here at Jamesons. So while the method with the copper pots is more traditional, introducing this method has allowed us to introduce a lot more flavours and expressions to our brands. The beer or wash that we put into the copper pots was made using a combination of malted and unmalted barley. But earlier I also mentioned corn or maize. In the brew house we've made a second type of beer using corn and malt. And the beer made using the corn is only sent into this system with the columns. So we introduce the beer here to the first column and then introduce steam here, which of course is hot, so it rises. These plates have little perforations, allowing the beer coming in to meet the rising steam. And again, a similar idea, because alcohol has a lower boiling point than that of water. When the hot steam rises, it binds on to the alcohol in the beer and takes it with it as a vapour. The alcohol vapours rise and meet a condenser and are again a liquid. So I suppose the aim or the idea is the same, it's just the method is slightly different. This is repeated a second and then again a third time, and after the third distillation we have our new make, what we call grain spirit, and that's at 94% alcohol by volume. Contrastingly to the pot still, which is quite spicy, the grain spirit matures into a whiskey which is a lot lighter and fruitier in flavour, because when you have tall stills, only the lightest alcohols actually rise up. And we typically don't use the grain whiskey on its own to make whiskey brands like we do with the pot still. Generally, what's done with the grain whiskey is after maturation, it'll be married with the pot still whiskey to create what's called a blended whiskey. I'm sure you might have heard that terminology before. That's typically what it means. A blended whiskey is a marriage of the two different styles. That's like Jameson, for example. Jameson is a blend. We don't yet have whiskey now, however. We only have our distillates. Legally, you have to mature for a minimum of 3 years in an oak cask in Ireland, and only then can you call it Irish whiskey. So at the next few stages, I'll start to delve a bit more into maturation. We're going to go back outside. Current distillery. That tall building is housing the column or continuous stills that we saw on the second board inside. And there's a building behind the trees there with 3 windows housing 3 of the copper pot stills. There are 6 up there now in total, 2 sets of 3. That's possibly one of the most modern whiskey production plants in the world. But the core processes and ingredients that they used in the past in there really haven't changed all that much. Obviously a bit more modernized these days. The capacity of that distillery is impressive because every single drop of Jameson you find anywhere in the world, it's all made back there. And that goes the same for all of our other brands as well, because we don't just make Jameson here, we also make a whiskey called Powers, we make Midleton, Redbreast, the Spot range, and our newest range is the Method of Madness range. So they're always working back there. But however, I suppose we do have a small exception to the fact that all the whiskey is made back there, because we still make just a very small amount down here on the old site. Because in 2015, we built a micro distillery down here. So now we're going to move on and take a look at the micro distillery. It's a bit more modern than what we've seen so far. I feel instantly smarter when I put these on. So this, of course, is our micro distillery built in 2015. This is used for the purposes of training, innovation, and experimentation. So they can make very small quantities of distillate here and try out new things. So it's very innovative. But it's still also very much tied to the history and tradition of the company. Towards the beginning of the tour, I pointed out our distiller's cottage, which houses the company's archives these days. A few years ago, in our archives, 2 diaries belonging to John Jameson II himself were uncovered. And in the diaries were almost like recipes for whiskies. So one of the things they tried to do in the micro distillery is recreate those whiskies from the past. So it's really interesting. It's also used for training. There's a team of recent graduates working here, typically graduates of chemical engineering, and this is where they learn the art and the science of distillation, so they'll become distillers one day. And it's a really good place to learn because it's very manual in comparison to the larger distillery. The wash still here has a capacity of 2,500 litres, and each of the others, the faints and spirit stills, 1,500, meaning this distillery can produce up to 5 barrels of distillate a week, in comparison to the large plant, which can sometimes produce up to 2,500 barrels a day. So a bit of a difference in scale, but as I say, great here to try out new things, because you know if you're only making a small batch, it doesn't matter if you mess up too much. We made an addition to this micro distillery last year in the form of another still. It's hidden behind those wash carriers there. You'll see it more closely if you look to the right as we exit. The still down there doesn't make whiskey. The still down there is used to make gin. So earlier this year we released our very first gin under the Method of Madness range. And of course, gin doesn't have to be matured like whiskey. Gin gets its flavours from all of the botanicals that are infused with it. But of course, with whiskey, that derives a lot of its flavours from the wood. So speaking of that, we're now going to move on to the next stage where I'll elaborate a bit more on maturation and the wood and the barrels we use for it. So we're going to exit out from that door right here.